I will quickly get into introducing my panelists and then setting the context for this panel that we have. Today, we have with us Guncha, who is a security compliance architect at IBM. She is passionate about cybersecurity awareness, and she spends time conducting webinars for different stakeholders. These include parents, children, and teachers themselves from private and government-aided schools on online safety and security, a topic which a lot of us need to be educated on, especially in today's context. So she is going to throw some light on what are these different issues that we need to be engaging in. We also have with us Chitra, who is a social entrepreneur with 17 years of experience in education, child protection, livelihoods, and skill development. She is one of the founders and partners in a consulting firm called Space2Grow, which does a lot of work with NGOs in India and South Asia. She also co-founded Mudita Foundation, and she also incubated LIFE, which stands for Livelihoods Initiatives for Empowerment. And she's also worked with Justice and Care, working closely on initiatives for survivors of child trafficking. She is an avid reader and also enjoys yoga and music and baking. And I don't know why we have started the panel yet. We have one more person with us, Apar. He is the executive director of the Internet Freedom Foundation, an organization that conducts advocacy on digital rights and liberties. And a key idea that he is working on is to reduce the gap between public and public policy. The Internet Freedom Foundation actually evolved from the Save the Internet public campaign in 2015, which is related to the issues of net neutrality. He was elected to the Ashoka Fellowship in 2019. And he has practiced law before that for more than a decade at the intersection of litigation and technology. And he is somebody who has been intrigued with technology since his younger days. And today he will be talking to us about digital rights. So with that, I will jump into the panel to set some context. I think in the morning we had quite a fiery discussion on just fundamentally reimagining learning and education, moving beyond the factory model of education, the market-driven approach to education. And there were kind of mixed views which were emerging on potential possibilities and dangers of technology and online learning. I don't think the panel found so many supporters of online education in the morning. But this panel is based on the assumption that EdTech is here to stay. Online learning is going to become a bigger part of the future. And therefore, if that is the future we are heading towards, what is it that we need to know? What is it that we need to understand and prepare ourselves for today? So hopefully the panel today will give us some insights around digital rights from a learner's perspective. It will give us insights around what are all the dimensions of digital safety that need to be considered when we are talking about underage learners, and sometimes who are also first-time users of technology and are engaging with the online space, and who are the key stakeholders whose voices need to be heard as we move towards maybe some kind of a policy framework and a regulatory framework for that. So just continuing the conversation, I was just looking at some data as part of preparing for this panel. So in the last couple of years, what we are seeing in terms of trend is that smartphone usership has gone up amongst our learners. And this is across the board in urban and rural contexts and across children in government and private schools. Now, what it means for ownership of phones is also an issue in itself in terms of access and people getting time on it. And in the government context, we've also heard learners share with us how their parents have had to struggle to get them a phone. But there's definitely an effort being made towards that. And the second interesting data point which came to me was around just the profile of internet users. While the penetration of internet is still low in India as a whole, but if we see the composition, what was interesting was that the age group between 12 to 19, it almost comprises 37% of our users and this is data in 2019. And this is only set to increase as we move forward. So there are more and more young people who are accessing the internet for the first time. And therefore, in that context, what does it mean to articulate digital rights for young learners and digital safety, privacy, and protection for young learners in that context? And there's this quote, which again, a young girl from Orissa had shared, that whom to believe, what not to believe in the online world. It's very hard to figure. So how do we prepare ourselves for that? And when we talk about issues of safety, the context has just become so much more diverse in the last year and a half. Like, tools, platforms which were not designed for learning are being used for learning. WhatsApp has emerged as such a big tool for learning, for bringing learners together. Suddenly, children's information is being made available to different kinds of stakeholders who do not know how to deal with that information as well. There are devices that are owned by adults but are being used by young learners. And adults have access to the information which young learners are accessing as well. We've had instances of adults sharing some objectionable material in WhatsApp groups that we formed for children. And suddenly our facilitators were like, I don't know how to deal with this. What should I do with that child? Should I block them from the group? Should I talk to the adult? What does it mean for the psychological well-being of the children in the group, for that person from whose family this was shared? So there are all kinds of issues which have opened up, which we were not maybe ready for. So it'll be great if all of you, as part of your opening remarks, could throw some light on some of these questions that have been put out. Guncha, would you like to start?
Sure. So thank you, first of all, for giving us this platform. And I think this is a very important topic. Internet has definitely diminished all the boundaries, and it has made much more information available for the children, to the extent that the children today can now outsmart their parents and their teachers. They know much more information about the topics than what we know. And at times this leads to the evil side of the internet, where now the children are more informed and hence they are not really paying attention in the class. This information is really much less than what they already know. And that could lead to the mind then deviating to other things on the internet that is available, because they are working on their laptops. They have easy access to the internet and they can browse a lot of material. Now, this brings definitely my child, if I look at my child as a mother, he's definitely doing a lot more than what I have done at his age. But when it comes to the evil side, I also see that there are a lot of distractions and there is a lot of illegal and inappropriate content available on the internet. And since we have a lawyer amongst us, I need to be careful about the words that I'm using here. When I say illegal, I want to clearly call out that there is a lot of material that could impact the social and physical well-being of the living beings on the earth. And that is where I feel that information, if not taken well, not taken by a mature individual, can can show the bad use of internet, can lead to the negative impact of the internet. And that is where I think we as adults, we as the people who can help the children understand and make a good use of the internet are responsible. We can bring together the community that can help the children understand and be mature in handling the information they get on the internet. And we have a very big role to play here.
Right. Thanks, Guncha. So you're basically throwing light on a lot of information literacy which might be needed in today's context. Apar, would you have any thoughts on just what all do we need to be thinking about, and how do we even articulate digital rights when we're talking about young learners?
So thank you so much for inviting me here. And I'm not a specialist on learning outcomes or with respect to primary, secondary, or higher education. But what we have noticed in our work around digital rights, which is the work which I do alongside my colleagues at the Internet Freedom Foundation, is the intersection of our fundamental rights and technology. And what we have noticed more often is that it's a fundamental issue which commences from the issue of access to the internet itself, which is equality of opportunity, if not outcome by itself. But the access for internet is a issue which cannot be easily gathered from existing data points, also much more readily towards policy prescriptions specifically for age groups immediately. Because the way we look at key data sets, which are firstly the annual reports and subscriber data from the TRAI of the telecom companies. The second is the annual report of the Department of Telecom, and the recent collection of data also, which is under the National Family Health Survey or responses to questions in Parliament. They are not focused specifically in terms of uncovering what are the data trends in terms of creation of backbone infrastructure, availability of smartphone devices, availability of high quality internet, which is quite often needed in learning situations, which then facilitate such kind of video-based interactions in which outcomes will be much better in terms of conducting classes. The second issue, which I think which comes across quite immediately to us and has been flagged quite often, especially in areas of secondary and postgraduate and graduate education, has been with respect to the educational institutions implementing proctoring softwares quite often, or class attendance softwares, which firstly do not have the right amount of privacy practices and data protection principles in place, where a lot of data is being gathered of children who are below the ages of who are minors, or sometimes who are young adults. And sometimes it's quite invasive also, because the camera and the microphone has to be switched on at all points in time. And such kind of data side collection also is not clearly described by the institution as to what it may be inputted into towards devising course curriculum or individual impacts towards that learner in that situation. So there is a immediate issue with respect to privacy, which emerges as well. And finally, I think there's also a free expression issue. I think this is especially relevant for learners who are in the secondary and the graduate and the postgraduate levels again, where essentially we have seen educational institutions make social media policies in which students have to disclose their handles and cannot engage in topics of conversation which may draw criticism towards the institution. One very prominent example is the social media policy of the National Institute of Fashion Technology, NIFT, which has been resisted by students. So I think across a spectrum, from access towards privacy, data protection, and even free expression, I think there are multiple areas of work where we need to invest much more in terms of research, analysis, and advocacy to ensure that young children, minors, and young adults who are in learning situations can utilize the greater integration which has been forced due to the pandemic.
Right, right. And Chitra, would you like to add on this from the dimension of safety in the digital space? I know you've also done a lot of work around trafficking, and recently I was reading how trafficking has moved to online mediums as well, and children are kind of unaware about that. So if you want to maybe open up the digital safety piece a little bit more.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much. And it's amazing to be a part of a great panel. And it's such an pertinent topic. And I used to keep thinking, why are we not talking about it collaboratively? And I think that's amazing to be on a panel where we can really think of collaboration as well. Just to start off with, I think from a digital rights point of view, with the work that we have done at Space to Grow, or the work that I've done in the past on issues of human trafficking, I think the biggest right which children should have is safe spaces for interaction. And if we really look at it today, there aren't any safe spaces for interaction for children. There could be schools where there can be counselors, but not all children are learners. You have a huge population in the country where children are not having the access to education itself. But at the same time, what's happening to these children is they still need to have an interaction with somebody. So when they are actually trying to be at an adolescent, young adult age where they want to have those interactions, want to have those spaces, when there's lack of space for them, then it is these times when there are traffickers and there are people who actually try to lure these children and then they get trafficked. So I think the whole point of digital rights is beyond learners to me. I mean, it's not just for learners because not everybody in the country is learning, unfortunately. But I think if we extend this, we have to look at it from the point of view of, say, access. First, how many of them are able to really access it? When we're talking about protection, I think it's more about privacy. Now, if you look at the edtech companies, everybody does have a, data protection policy, but I haven't read anywhere as to how are they going to protect the data that they're gathering of these children. And it's not just the parents' data that they're gathering. So privacy in terms of ensuring that these children data that is getting collected by, say, edtech companies or other virtual platforms, how are they really protecting that? And of course, one thing I think I'll add to the definition of digital rights, and which is really important, whether it is from a human trafficking standpoint or the learner standpoint, is redressal mechanism. And I think it's great to have Apar here, but the whole point is how to really make justice happen. Because you may have, I mean, it's taken us a huge time to really understand physical space and safety, where we have POCSO today or the JJ Act. To really understand the digital space and safety is a huge challenge, because it's very convenient for everybody to say, "Theek hai, ye hota hai, it's okay." As long as the person is not in front of you and something has happened, it's okay. How do you make reporting mandatory, reporting easier, reporting friendly for children? And there is a process of justice as well. So if I have to really look at how to define this, it would be access, protection, and redressal mechanisms, and providing them that space to interact. And that's going to be the biggest challenge that we're going to have now and forever. And even if we think that online way of learning may not be the best way, definitely there has to be better ways. You have to go to school back. But nothing is going to stop our young learners and the Gen Zs to stop from being in the online space. So we have to provide them with the safety that's required, and that's what it entails.
Right. And I think that's an important distinction that you bring in, Chitra, that even if learning is not happening online, more and more young people are going online. And therefore, what does it mean from a digital rights and safety perspective? Apar, I do have a follow-up question for you when you were talking about, privacy being invasive and it being kind of a threat to free expression as well. But many a times, like what Chitra was saying, it's also dismissed, right? Like these are like young people, they are anyways like, they're in a learning space. And then there's this whole notion of trying to kind of control, and under the garb of supervision as well. Sometimes these things are kind of passed off. But what are the implications if we don't kind of talk about it right now? Like, and also things like data protection, right? Many people very offhandedly say, "To kya hua if our data is going?" It's not like we are any we are not politicians, we are not like any important personalities, so it's okay if my data is going. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like and especially I think, like, again, in rural, I also want to bring this distinction between urban and rural. Not like people in urban areas are also educated about data and what that means. Like, I know all of us sign in to Zoom and do agree to terms and practices, but how many of us know the implications of it as well? So what does all of this mean for us as regular people and learners?
I think for children who are in physical environments who have been put under processes of constant monitoring through video-based surveillance, for instance, there are already studies, if you look in Google Scholar, that they react very differently compared to how they would react in environments where such kind of supervision would not be there in terms of constant monitoring through video. And if you notice in Delhi, it's been taken one step further, with the access then being provided to parents in which they can live stream it while the classes are being conducted physically. So it will definitely have a impact on the child, because the parent will then at all points in time, at least to the contemplation of the child, be viewing it at some point or the other. The other thing is, Neha, when you just take it to the online learning context completely, there'll be a sense of self-censorship. For instance, classes also comprise of people from different social backgrounds, and parents quite often exercise choices on children as to who they can fraternize with for their safety or whatever is their outlook towards it. But it definitely diminishes the opportunity for the development of autonomous choice and judgment for the child if you shelter them too much. Now, of course, these are things I think experts can get into at a much better level. However, that's one degree of harm which I think does impact people when their data is gathered, especially in these kind of learning environments which are there. The second is the data itself will not be isolated from testing environments. Slowly, the data itself becomes a testing environment, which is to gauge the attentiveness or class participation or the other metrics of standards and scoring for children. And it'll go beyond attendance. And we all know from our own experience what has been our basic grouse with attendance. Not only its subjectivity, it being an incorrect barometer of fulfilling the objectives of the course which we have attended, right? We have always stated at certain points in times that it is not a correct metric. Now, just imagine, for instance, how Amazon uses data for people who work in its warehouses, and similar systems which will be developed over a period of time for children in learning environments, but even in social environments, for instance, because the larger thought process around development and coding in any kind of digital environment today is retention of a person's time, attention, and energy towards that outcome, towards that process, not in terms of gauging learning, which conceptual or otherwise, which is a much more deeper examination, right? Which may require somebody to write an essay. But in terms of a person clicking or scrolling or not being able to minimize the window, and all of this will be baked in. Take it from me in writing. So data protection should also be thought about as a issue which needs to be well defined, provided for user rights which are there. For instance, if incorrect information is being recorded, if the algorithms are capturing incorrect information which results in incorrect scoring, a clear data protection right is the right to request for modification and correction. Now, unless you have a law or a policy, it impacts people. So beyond the larger issues of surveillance, which impact our national polity, I think surveillance also has a very deep connection to people in several ways. These are some illustrative examples, but you can also think about how data will ultimately be sold at the back end. For instance, I'm just reading the privacy policy of the largest edtech provider, and it says it can share the information with trusted services, but it will not notify you when it shares it. It will not tell you under what conditions it shares it. And tomorrow, you may discover as soon as the child graduates from school or gets a school board result back, there'll be a flood of information which will be pushed out by private universities and colleges recommending their courses to that person, which will impact their choices and availability. But it's there for you to also think about. And later down the line, if it's commoditized to a very great extent, it may also be preparation tutorials for entry to these kind of institutions, right? So you will keep people, and there can be differential pricing based on scholarships also. So, and all of this will be determined by personal data. I've gone on for a bit, but I just wanted to illustrate some much more practical use cases, which you can find quite easily if you scroll through Twitter, just by following the topic EdTech, because it's all based on monetization and greater harnessing of private equity capital.
Right. No, I think that was very, very useful, Apar. And these are not conversations that we are having on an everyday basis for us to kind of realize the implications of what it can mean. And I think especially for people who are just starting to kind of use EdTech to design learning experiences, to be able to think, and there's more and more conversation about AI coming into the learning process to also allow for more personalized learning to happen. But then how does that conflict with maybe choice-based pathways that we want to pursue? Are also things to kind of think about and maybe come in conflict with each other. And I'll come to the regulatory framework conversation. I think that's definitely something we want to touch upon. But before that, I think an important question today is also who is responsible for ensuring this learner safety? And like I said, that there is a spectrum that we're working with, just given the diverse context that India has as a country. On one hand, you have your elite educated parents who also might not be aware of the implications, who are also might be too busy to know what the child is doing online. On the other hand, you have low literate populations who are maybe getting the device for the first time and do not know what their children can be subjected to as a result of this. You have teachers who are just kind of grappling with technology and kind of becoming, trying to become confident and design their learning experiences online. And on the other hand, you have government education systems as well who are right now pushing to get as many people online. And then and if you look at the chat box, there are instances which will happen, which will make people go off the online bandwagon and then come back again. And in the midst of all of this, there are children. So and then like you said, there are issues related to consent. What does informed consent even mean in a context like this, and whose responsibility is it to make sure that people are being informed before their consent is being asked for? Secondly, when it comes to learning, can they be denied learning just because they refuse to share data? So there are also ethical questions like that which come up. And then what you said, surveillance, that we've had instances where parents have told us that, you have to make separate WhatsApp groups for girls and boys, and it's only then I will allow my girls to participate in that. And you can see a girl has said that if I spend too much time on the phone, my parents kind of get angry with me. So how does this ecosystem come together, and are there more players who need to be part of this? And the private technology players, like you said, who might be designing it from a very tech and coding perspective and not from a learning perspective. What does this mean, this interconnectedness, and how does it all come together? And Chitra, if you want to start with that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Neha. It's a very, very difficult question. I just have to say that, because of the fact that the complexity this has, it's really important to, grapple with the complexity I think the only solution is to collaborate. I mean, that's something that we keep talking about and we want to do that more. So currently, at Space to Grow, we work with schools to impart, trainings and sessions, and we also work with EdTech company. One of the EdTech company, I mean, as a use case, I can share an example is that, this is one of the marquee initiatives in the country where we have tried to get an EdTech company to really understand online child safety, where we are saying that online child safety is not just, don't look at online child safety as a teacher training in the classroom and then if there is an abuse, what to do about it. But also look at, because of most of the EdTech companies today do not have a KYC as well, because of which many of the people who could come with a fake name, identity theft, and there could just be traffickers in the actual classroom. So we're not sure whether it's going to be all students in the classroom or there are also traffickers in the classroom. So the whole idea was to really educate, them and really get this ball rolling. It's been almost a year. And I think the solution that we have tried to work out is that we're working on the product itself of the tech. How do you make a product child safe? How do you remove profanity from the platform itself? How do you actually make enough and more, methods to ensure that if there is an abuse case which is happening during the class, there is immediate report abuse button, which actually goes on to a team which is going to redress this. So we then set up this redressal team, which is called the child safety team. We work very closely. This EdTech that we work with is Vedantu, and we have set up their child safety team. We have run n number of training programs for parents, teachers, and students. and also the external stakeholders. And what we are now doing is working with the government and engaging with the government. So the whole solution is like product has to be there. There has to be life skills. There have to be internal policies and redressal systems. And you have to have a government engagement. All of this has to go on together to really ensure child safety, whether it is an edtech or whether it is schools or whether it is any anybody who's actually getting into education in the online space. So here to just talk about the government engagement, I think, everybody, you knock any door, they'll say, this is a part of Department of Education. Now, Department of Education will say, EdTech is not a part of us. Schools are a part of us. You go to, the state, the child protection units, they'll say, yes, all children in the country are a part of us and we regulate that. But what the problem is, we have to check whether we can regulate EdTechs. You go to the IT, the recent guideline, we've had like series of discussions and recommendations that we've given. The IT guideline and the conversations are only around social media platforms right now. It's either WhatsApp, Twitter, or YouTube, or probably Facebook. And I think if we have to really read the definition of the social intermediaries and the significant intermediaries or people who are putting the digital modules, if we have to read all that, I see EdTech fitting pretty well, but nobody has yet called it out. Okay, so the whole point to say is that it really requires a lot of strategic engagement with different sets of department, a multi-stakeholder department, and then we will have to look at how this legislation can happen. So some of the stakeholders that have to be here is cyber police. So we had like a Karnataka state government meeting where we had the cyber police, we had the Department of Education, and we also had the ICPS director. So what happens is when three very significant departments who really look at children and cybercrime come together, then there is a solution that's happened. Today, there is a solution and they're really working on it. They've sent out guidelines and they're asking to really mandate this for all edtech companies in the state of Karnataka. So, so if you have to ask the question of who is responsible, I think it has to be right now, if I have to answer who is it, I don't have an answer. What I have an answer, or what my opinion would be, the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, NCPCR, and the state SCPCRs have to become the nodal points for ensuring that any educational platform in the online space is legislated and is regulated. So I think that's where I would, talk about this. And of course, parents can do much, teachers have to do a lot, schools have to do a lot, but I think one is at the government level, and one where we have learned from the experience of Vedantu and some of the schools that we are working is internal redressal system with technical expertise. If you can really work on those two, like, work on internal systems, have awesome, robust redressal processes, and have legislation together, then I think we will probably come somewhere midway to really figure this out together. So yeah.
If I may add to that, very good point on government playing a key role there and having all the regulations and policies that can drive all the need for ensuring safe learning environment for the children. And at the same time, yes, redressal within those edtech companies and within those institutes is important. I think community as a large, and parents, the entire ecosystem as a large, have a wider role to play in bringing the awareness as well. You can always give vegetables and pastries and keep them in front of the children. Children will always go for the pastries rather than the veggies, right? So you have to make them aware, make them understand why the decision of taking a veggie is more important and more healthy for them rather than the pastry. And that is where I think it's not only the government and these edtech companies, it is also the parents, the teachers, the community as large who have to come together, make themselves aware. First, they have to educate themselves. They themselves are falling short of this basic understanding of what is safe for them. And then they have to, at the same time, help the children understand that. And that is where at least organizations like IBM, where they are working together with STEM for Girls and imparting that education to the government-aided institutes, as well as the volunteers working towards that with the private institutes and government-aided institutes. I think they play an important role here. And if we can bring these volunteers and these organizations, non-profit organizations together, I think we become a stronger force to make the entire community much more aware of the pitfalls here.
Sure. Thanks, Guncha. Appa, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, so just like to double down on the initial recommendation on access, at least, I think data will inform our conversations in a much better way. So, for instance, if the division between internet availability and access between men and women, which is what is being captured, can also include age-based differentials, which can regularly be put out, we'll have a much more authoritative basis rather than just market trends or sample survey sizes. So it'll be much more comprehensive. The second is, I think we can, given the diversity of the issues we are faced with, and the huge amount of deployment of private capital and the development of technology platforms, this is a conversation is ripe for consultation by, which can be determined by ministries also in collaboration, right? They can put out a white paper inviting comments from experts in the technology, education, safety domains, and you can then identify the stakeholder groups, the interests, what works, what doesn't work. Because the sense I'm also getting from the conversation is it's fairly it's a very large block. It needs to be broken down into several smaller pieces.
Right. And that actually is a good segue, since you kind of laid out the process for us in terms of how we can come up with a more regulatory framework. And there's an interesting comment in the chat box as well, if you're reading it, in terms of how inequalities can be recreated in a digital world as well. So when we are talking about a regulatory framework, and with so many kind of private technology players also driving what's happening in the edtech space, chances are that we are going to reinforce that inequity rather than have more democratized, systems for accessing edtech as well, because profit also comes into play there. So if one was to think about devising an edtech policy, if one was to think about devising a regulatory framework, one, who needs to be held accountable for putting this together? Second, what are the values it needs to be based on? And in the morning, we were talking about paradoxes, and one of the paradoxes that came up was the tech-savvy humanist. So what are some of those values? How do we bring in, say, principles of how learning needs to be designed, which is based on principles of autonomy, which is based on principles of contextualization, and maybe move away from standardized learning practices as well? So how do we account for all of that in an edtech policy and framework as well? On one hand, it is about technology, it is about data rights, but it's also about learning and how learning needs to be designed. So any thoughts on that? And Guncha, if you would like to start, because IBM is one of the players kind of, and you have your own platforms as well, which are being accessed by learners. Are there any conversations that are happening right now about what's the role from an ethical standpoint that private technology companies also need to play here?
Right. So private technology companies definitely have a big role to play, because they would have to build in those principles of privacy and security within their technology that they are building. But at the same time, it's not just the private companies that are defining that, and government definitely has a big role to play here. It would be a collaboration between the government and government bringing together all these private companies, as well as ensuring the educational institutes come together and they define what the governance should be, what should be the policies surrounding it. You can define the policies and framework, all that is good, but implementing it, policing it is definitely going to play a key role here. You can put in AI. There was discussion about AI, the algorithms deciding what is the decision to be taken. Again, you need to make sure that the technology, the algorithms that are being used, they are fair and they are transparent. They are explaining why a certain decision is being taken. So ensuring that anything that is implemented into the education system is not taken for granted, but basically it is helping the teachers and the education system to decide the right outcome based on various algorithms that are run, and is explaining it clearly why certain decisions are being taken. Along with this, there is also a need for bringing the awareness, and that is where the human side and as I said, you can put all the information in front of the children. Children will always go for the information that is more attractive, more engaging for them, which generally ends up being media where games are there, or there's some videos on YouTube channels, which may not be so productive for them. So having that governance along with basic awareness and education for the children in terms of what is right, so that they can make their own ethical decisions of the right versus wrong, and then you can define the education system from there. The education system itself needs to be modern enough now. It has to start changing the way they define the whole structure. As you may realize, the trends, it is earlier we used to go for only engineering degrees and the doctorate degrees, and now there are plethora of degrees. And recently I learned there is also gaming degrees now, which children can get. So just judging the child based on their performance and their attendance or their attentiveness is definitely not going to help. The whole education system needs to understand that internet is going to be here. It is not going to change. Children are going to have much more access to information than what the education system can provide within the class, and hence deciding the progress of the child based on what they have learned, how they are able to output it, is going to be more important in the future.
Like in some ways, Guncha, you're saying like educate the child and then leave it to them. In the morning, we were also having conversations of how we might not need schools in the future. And then what would learning look like? But Chitra, Apar, any thoughts from you on this as well?
So just to add on to what Gunja was saying, that I think I'm also part of a school management committee of a government school, and I was talking to the principal very recently, and now that the schools are planning to be opened up and all of that, he said it's going to be such a challenge because getting children to come to the classroom and look at the teacher and have that conversation now after 2 years is going to be a challenge, because they're just so distracted. They want their phones, they want their systems there with them, or they're reaching out. So I think if we have to really it's like we went through a huge unlearning process 2 years back. We'll have to unlearn again and then redefine this whole thing. So I think one of the most important thing is that if you have to go back and say, what is the value system, whether it was digital space or whether it was physical space, I think safety of children is going to be the biggest value that any education sector player is going to really work on. Because if safety is not provided, we have seen, instances and cases where emotional well-being, the psychological well-being, their entire thing about, safety is, once it gets threatened, the impact it has on their education or whatever they have to do in life is getting affected. So I think if you have to really sum this up to say that, what is it, that one thing that everybody has to really focus on is safety. So I keep telling this, and I always keep thinking that when will that day come when, parents are not going to look at, okay, this is a school which gives 90% marks, so I need to send my child. But I would want to look at a school which gives 100% safety to my child. Because if there is safety and if there is that kind of assurance, everything else can fall in place. But if that is not guaranteed, then I think everything else is going to not fall in place. So I think that's, one real important thought that I thought would want to share with the panel.
And Apar, would you specifically maybe want to respond to the question in the chat box about just reinforcing, recreating inequity in a digital space, and maybe how policies need to be designed keeping that that does not happen, and is it even possible?
So I think my understanding about education also comes from a much more constitutional perspective. Now, I do recognize that is a bit far removed from our practiced reality, where education is essentially an obligation placed on the government to fulfill with an equal measure for all children, irrespective of their station of birth, of their location. But we have not been able to achieve that even today with respect to, let's say, even primary education, right? Or secondary education, where I'm aware of certain data where there's a greater amount of concern which erupts. So primarily the private sector has also always been conceptualized as a stakeholder which augments that lack of state capacity, let's say in the secondary level then. Okay, but the primary obligation always falls to the government to provide it. However, what we are seeing at present is with technology-based learning, in which not only there's a creation of platforms which bridge the gap between teachers and children for the conduction for the of any kind of course instruction, but also where platforms are becoming course creators by itself quite often, right? And they're becoming schools and universities by themselves in some instances, right? Where even non-state recognitions, examinations, which we are now seeing for professional environments, also seep down towards children, right? Certified by XYZ platform. I think there is a need to look at the underlying policy frameworks of education, where the national education policy must account for this. And I believe these are a series of conversations. I think given the number of young people which are there, for instance, Chitra is highlighting again and again for her, safety from her perspective is the most important variable in this larger equation. So definitely that needs to be accounted for. And with safety, there'll be other issues of privacy also, which will be accounted for, which touch upon safety, but sometimes privacy will also be surveillance. So this can be looked at from the perspective of, let's say, a government ministry such as the Ministry of Electronics and IT working with the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Women and Child Welfare. So definitely what we can look towards, not only as a process, but also in terms of a deeper rethink, is the Department of Education and several government ministries in an interministerial group working together towards what's happening today. And I think the conversation, when it will start and where it will end, will not be a 1 year or a 6-month process, despite what we will desire. We will learn over a period of time, and this process will need to continue over a period of time, given that things change very drastically. For instance, there'll be also incredible deviations in terms of teleconnectivity access, then curriculum instruction, etc., testing, grading, child safety. All of these variables will vary also from geography and economic facility and the grades which are there. So I think we need to start this conversation. I haven't seen if this is happening to this level of depth, but maybe this panel can prompt one.
Yeah, we definitely hope to kind of initiate that conversation. Unfortunately, I don't have time for more questions, but there are questions in the chat box if you would like to respond to those. Some really interesting points are coming up, and I know time is never enough for a conversation like this, but thank you so much, all of you, for joining in. I think lots of takeaways for us, definitely on the need for collaboration and just who all need to be having a voice, keeping our learners and the young adults at the center of it all, but just also from a specialization point of view, we need educators, we need technology players, we need child protection experts, we need cybersecurity experts to kind of come together for this. And when we are talking about digital rights, kind of looking at it from the lens of access, equality of opportunity, privacy, free expression, safety. And I think the point, Chitra, that you were making, redressal mechanisms, I think most of the times our policies kind of stop at maybe identification or spreading awareness, but what are those redressal mechanisms that need to be put in place, and how everybody needs to be educated for that definitely is an important aspect for us to be thinking about. And for people who are actually getting onto the online space and designing these learning experiences, how are they also educating themselves? So thank you all, and we hope to continue the conversation at a later date as well. With that, actually, Pallavi, if you could move to the video. We're going to end the panel here, but you can continue some of the conversations in the chat box. And we are now going to move towards launching our paper, a research paper that we recently did on building STEM mindsets. I feel like that also kind of goes hand in hand when we're talking about technology as an emerging space, specifically in the learning. And in the meanwhile, I'd also like to introduce Manoj Balachandran from IBM. He leads the CSR for India and South Asia. He has been instrumental in many, many initiatives which IBM has taken up, specifically around STEM as well, and also around digital safety. I know IBM is doing a lot of work around that as well with the schools that they're working with. And Manoj is also going to be talking to us about why this need for this research and why the paper. So Manoj, maybe you can start and we can play the video after.
Oh, thank you so much, Neha, and a very, very good afternoon and good evening. I think it's 10 minutes past 4. What an engaging panel discussion. And thank you so much, Apar, Guncha, and Chitra, and Neha for moderating this session. This really made me introspect into my own practices at home and just realized that life was so much more simpler 2 years back, and now with all the digital stuff which has come on, and this is there to stay, become much more complex, and a whole lot of other people and other players which needs to really come together, collaborate, and then make a big impact, right? So a relevant topic, as every one of us here are a stakeholder in this conversation when it comes to education, especially the digital education. At least each of us will be having at least 1 or 2 kids at home in front of devices and taking these online classes. Thousands of others were waiting for schools to open up in states across the country, right? Now, in just the last 2 years, I think our approach to education itself has actually changed tremendously. I know that the government did come out with NEP, schools pivoted to digital online education, teachers have actually learned new tools and technology. Parents they're fine to give these digital devices to their kids. Kids love the fact that they're now getting more screen time and so on and so forth. But I think while there are so many of these positives also happening in some of these privileged classes, I think India's vast majority of children who are still studying in government schools are waiting to see their beloved classrooms open up again, right? So I think our education system took a big beating with lack of infrastructure, lack of access. I think Apar talked about lack of policy, just regulation there, a lack of new updated pedagogy for teachers as well. I think the world has changed overnight and so much that I think we have embraced digital much faster than any other point in history. I think in Times of India, just in yesterday's Times of India, there was this report about India's 25th unicorn, this Zetwork, just in this year, 2021, just in the 8 months of this year, the 25th unicorn, which actually had. So imagine the job opportunities which are now coming up because of this environment of entrepreneurship across every field you can possibly think of, right? Whether it's technology, healthcare, retail, education, manufacturing. Just talking about manufacturing, whoever thought that we could actually have the world's largest e-bike manufacturing unit in India? And now that Ola has started that center in Krishnagiri, just 40 kilometers, maybe 100 kilometers away from Bangalore. Who could have thought about the range of jobs which are now likely to come in, right? So today we have, if you actually, again, yesterday's Times of India had this was an ASCOM cloud skills report, which they were quoting, and they said that today we have close to around 600,000 people with cloud skills and close to 265,000 open spots. They're not able to fill in those spots, right? And by 2025, the demand for cloud skills is going to go up to 2.2 million. Now imagine, how do we inspire today's generation of kids to prepare for this future where creativity and innovation are some of the most important skills which are required, right? Among all the various other 21st century skills which we talk about. Resilience, logical thinking, problem solving, analytical thinking, data analysis. I think we also need to have the right attitude developed, and we call it the STEM skills and STEM attitudes. IBM's very own attempt in the CSR engagement is to bring this sea of opportunities to the forefront for all our learners. We have a program called the STEM for Girls, launched in 2019, and we have an attempt to reach out to close to 300,000 learners, to 300,000 students across the country, and to inspire them into the world of STEM. Quest Alliance is one of our partners who are working on that. In 7 of the 11 states, we have this. And these changes don't happen overnight, right? There needs to be systemic changes which needs to happen, and I think every stakeholder needs to play their part. So there are I would say four major areas where we really think that the biggest gains would actually come from. Just the need to look into STEM as a mindset and focus on instilling that in young learners and educators, rather than just focusing on teaching STEM as an isolated subject. I think we need to instill an attitude of inquiry in our kids. I think we teach them to ask why, or better still, if you teach them to ask those 5 W's and 1 H, I think it will really instill them into the world of STEM. There is also this huge gap with respect to how the future is evolving, future of work, learning, and where our current education system is. I think lack of awareness among teachers and parents, a special focus in ensuring that kids also get access to advice. And who do we go for career counseling? So they need to understand that, and that needs to really go down into the system. Parents needs to know, teachers need to know, because kids do look up to them for these advices. I think also need to working with teachers and parents on making sure that these generational biases, which influences choice for both boys and girls, I think that is a big issue which we have to address, and we need to eliminate this myopic view of who can do what, right? So that's something which we have to address. And then again, not enough work has been done on coming up with evidence-based models. I think we need to do a lot of work there. So I think all changes start with advocacy, and I think this report, which is a sincere attempt to bring about that new nuances of what's happening in reality. I really want to thank the team of Quest Alliance for coming out with this amazing report, and let's play that, Neha. I hope the video is now available.
Yes.
And as I said, let's be the change we want to see in this world. Okay.
On that note, Manoj, thank you so much for talking about the paper. Sanjana, Pallavi, we can play the video now. Thank you. And you can download the report from our website. Do give it a read and leave feedback for us. And that is it.